Story number 1. We thought the forest was ours, a hidden sanctuary where time didn't matter, and no one could find us. But that summer, someone did. He was my favorite teacher once. Now, he was standing barefoot by our fire pit, grinning, offering us tea brewed from mushrooms I hadn't seen him pick. I watched my friend dance with imaginary gnomes while two strangers, one with hands too familiar, tried to strip me of more than my sobriety. The man who once taught me how to mix color was now mixing pills and lies, whispering about communes, nudity, and liberation. I still wonder if Pal heard me scream, or if he simply knew what that teacher was capable of because he'd been there once, alone and silent. We weren't running from anything, really. We were just searching for the kind of silence that only mud, smoke, and distance could give. There's a certain magic in being 20 years old and utterly stupid. We believed in the healing power of campfires, the sacred bond of old mates, and the immortality of summer. Our tradition was simple. Every break from uni, we'd pack up our battered tents, load Chega's car with more meat than sense, and vanish into the green. We just pile into Cher's car on a Friday night and F off into the middle of nowhere with some tents and some bevies, some disposable barbecues and more meat than we knew what to do with. That's what we did, every summer, without fail. Some people traveled to Spain, others went to raves. We found meaning in cowpats, cold beer, and waking up with the sunrise burning through cheap nylon. Chega's was the unspoken leader, not because he was loud or brash, but because he always had a plan. He was the engineer among us. After all, his boot was packed with military precision, tents, sausages, foldable chairs, and a stereo that had survived 3 floods. Sammy was the literature lad, soft-spoken and surprisingly sarcastic when drunk. Brody was always spaced out, head in equations or constellations. Powell was chaos on legs, a rugby brute who somehow managed to do handstands at 3 a.m. in the mud.
And then there was Pal, the strange one, the quiet one, the one who never said much, but when he did, it stuck with you. I didn't understand him back then, not really. I just knew he needed space sometimes. I thought it was an introvert thing. I was wrong. Me, I was the theatre kid. Drama was in my blood. When I wasn't quoting Shakespeare or mimicking teachers behind their backs, I was probably singing off-key in the back of the car. I liked the forest because it didn't care who I was pretending to be. We thought the world was simple. Lads, beer, fire, repeat. That summer started like all the others. The same road trip playlist, the same dodgy map drawn on the back of a Nando's napkin, the same excitement when we found the old dirt track that led to our secret spot. It wasn't really a campsite. No signs, no bins, no benches, just a glade we'd claimed as ours. Deep in a forest no one seemed to care about. We'd found it by accident 2 years before, and somehow it had stayed untouched. No dog walkers, no scouts, no other students. We weren't all sporty guys or anything like that. Well, some of us weren't. There was a fire pit we'd built from bricks we'd lugged over several trips. It was misshapen but sturdy, like a medieval pizza oven. Around it, 6 tents sprang up like mushrooms, beer cans cracked, bacon sizzled. The woods, as always, welcomed us with the smell of pine and something sweet underneath, the scent of a place that remembered us. Pal disappeared that first afternoon. He always did. No one asked questions. He'd return when he was ready. We stayed up late, swapping old stories and trying to one-up each other on whose degree was most pointless. Chega's won, engineering paid, but it stole his soul, he claimed. Brody said physics was just staring at stuff until it made sense. Sammy joked that English lit was the art of inventing deeper meanings for what probably amounted to horny Victorian poetry. I defended drama until I couldn't remember my lines. At some point, we passed out, one by one, bellies full of beer and burnt burgers, but that smell, charcoal and cider, still lives somewhere in my nose. Then morning came. The hangover wasn't what woke me up. It was the smell of unfamiliar smoke,
and the low murmur of voices that didn't belong to us. I crawled out of my tent, the sunlight hitting my face like a judgmental god. Sammy was already poking at the embers of last night's fire with a stick, while Brody sat with his head in his hands, mumbling about time being weird today. Cheggers emerged from his tent, shirtless, yawning like a lion.
And then we saw them.
We were faced with an old hippie-looking couple, pitching their tent in the adjacent clearing to ours. They hadn't been there the night before, I was sure of it. The glade was isolated, far enough that even the rustling of a squirrel sounded like a stampede. You didn't just stumble upon this place. The woman was thin, not in the yoga and almond milk way, but in the I might be hollow inside way. Frizzy grey hair, oversized glasses that made her eyes seem cartoonishly large, and a dress made of mismatched fabrics that looked like she'd sewn them herself during a fever dream. She grinned at us like we were long-lost cousins. She had these huge, thick glasses that made her eyes look almost comical, and I immediately found her adorable. The man, on the other hand, was enormous. He looked like someone had dressed a bear in human clothes. His beard was massive, chaotic, with twigs and possibly a feather lodged in it. The jacket he wore, a faded army green thing, looked about 2 sizes too small and 3 decades too old, but it was the hat that stopped us. It was like a punk school backpack, but on his head, covered in buttons, pins, fishing lures, bottle caps, like he'd spent years collecting things no one wanted and decided they belonged on his skull. I couldn't stop staring at it, and then it hit me.
Hey, are you Mr. Hanroden? I blurted out after some small talk. You used to be an art teacher.
He paused, smoothed his beard, and then nodded slowly. It was him. My art teacher from years 7 through 10. I hadn't seen him since he abruptly left our school halfway through our GCSEs. He'd been funny, strange, brilliant. I remembered how he told us that perspective was a lie and color was emotional. He'd let me paint with my fingers when I forgot my brushes.
I had liked him.
He introduced the woman as Sainsbury. Yes, like the supermarket. She didn't flinch at the absurdity. They had shopping bags with the same name. Maybe it was a joke, maybe not.
Pal was nowhere to be seen, and somehow that made me feel just a little less safe.
Sainsbury offered us biscuits. They weren't in a package, just loose in a tin that had clearly survived wars, literal or metaphorical. They were pale and powdery, like someone had tried to make shortbread using nothing but memory. I took one out of politeness. It tasted like flour and regret. Cheggers, ever the diplomat, asked if they needed help finishing their tent setup. Hanroden waved him off with the kind of smile that suggested he hadn't said a real no in 20 years. We like to do things slow, and he said, let the forest breathe with us. Let the forest breathe with us. Who talks like that? Still, none of us batted an eye at the time. We thought they were eccentric, charming, a little odd. We thought ourselves worldly, uni lads who knew enough about the world to distinguish weird from wrong. Turns out we didn't know a damn thing. Sainsbury bent low over her kettle, boiling water from a dented jug. She sprinkled in loose leaves that looked more like forest floor than tea. Her wrists were like sticks wrapped in leather. You've been here before? Sammy asked. Oh, many times, Hanroden replied, peering up through his eyebrows like he was watching us from behind theatre curtains. You lot built a lovely fire pit. We're grateful. That caught us off guard. We'd never seen another soul here, never found trash, or footprints, or any sign someone else had been. I wanted to say that, to call him on the lie, but something about his posture made me shrink a bit, like he was used to being obeyed, even in silence. We shared lunch with them, nothing fancy, just sandwiches and leftover sausages. They didn't bring any food of their own, not even drinks. Sainsbury sipped from a thermos and declined everything we offered. Hanroden chewed slowly, almost theatrically, like each bite was a ritual. I never did see him eat much, Pal would later say. That was what bothered me first, and after the meal we split up for a short hike. The sun had finally cut through the clouds, and the forest floor steamed gently as we trampled it. Powell didn't come. No surprise there. He was probably halfway up a hill yelling at birds or sunbathing shirtless on a rock like a Neolithic god. We figured Pal would join us later. He often did his own thing on day one, exploring alone, headphones in, probably mapping out constellations in the dirt with a stick. But this time he didn't return. We got back just before dusk. Cheggers played DJ. Brody fiddled with the grill. And the couple returned like ghosts stepping out from behind a curtain. The odd thing was, they didn't seem tired, or sweaty, or dirty. While we had mud on our boots and twigs in our socks, they looked as pristine as when we'd left. They claimed to have gone for a walk too. A spiritual drift, is how Sainsbury put it. She kept talking about earth lines and tapping into moss frequencies. Brody laughed and made a joke about Pokemon. She didn't get it. The music played low, the grill hissed, and Cheggars burned another sausage. I was halfway into a lukewarm beer when Han Roden pulled out the first plastic bag. It was small. Contained something that looked like dried mushrooms. I thought nothing of it. This was England. Old hippies always had something tucked away. I assumed he'd light up a spliff. We'd all get giggly. And that would be the night. But then came the second bag, and the third. One had pills. Another had tiny paper squares, acid tabs. He unwrapped them all slowly, like a magician laying out his act. They had been meticulously dried out and packaged, and I knew from experience that drying out magic mushrooms of any kind takes ages.
I asked, stupidly, if they'd foraged that afternoon.
Oh, heavens no, Sainsbury said with a laugh that sounded like dried leaves. We prepare in advance. Nature's too unreliable for last-minute revelations. She said it like a joke. But nothing about their faces looked amused. Cheggers asked to roll a joint. Han Roden hesitated, glancing at Sainsbury, who gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. He handed over a small amount, just enough for one. Share, he said. It's sacred. That was when my skin first prickled.
Not from the drugs, from the way he said sacred, like we were trespassing on something we didn't understand.
Brody passed out early. Sammy wasn't far behind. The hike, the sun, the cider. It caught up to them. Cheggers was humming something tuneless while puffing on his joint, eyes half-lidded, smiling to himself. He tried offering it to Sainsbury. She wrinkled her nose and said, "We prefer clarity." Then Han Roden turned to me.
You ever try acid? He asked. I shook my head. Too fast. He smiled too slowly.
Then perhaps something gentler, he said, pulling out a pill the color of bone.
I refused. He tried again. A different pill. A different smile.
Free, he said, no strings. I wasn't buying what they were selling, no matter how much they insisted was free. No strings attached. I smoked a little, more to let Cheggers finish his share than out of interest. And that was enough. I felt my edges blur. The fire grow brighter. The sounds stretch like rubber bands. That's when they started talking about mushroom tea. The kettle hissed low, steam curling upward like a serpent with nowhere to go. Sainsbury held it like a priestess. Her bony fingers wrapped around the handle with reverence. Into the bubbling water, she tossed the dried mushrooms. Not a few slivers, a handful. They floated for a moment, then sank, melting into a dark cloud. You ever had mushroom tea before? She asked me. I shook my head. It's cleaner than eating them, Han Roden added, sitting cross-legged by the fire, hands on his knees like a monk at peace. Less gut rot, more clarity. I didn't respond. My mouth was dry, my heartbeat uneven. The beer was wearing off and the joint was crawling under my skin now, too slow to numb me, too fast to shake off. I asked if they were sure the shrooms were safe, and I remember even through the haze of pot and beer, I felt a very sobering chill when Han Roden waved my question away and vaguely said, I guess so. That should have been it. My signal to leave, to run, to scream, but instead, I sat there like a rabbit in the middle of the road, watching headlights bloom. Cheggars, ever the curious idiot, grabbed a mug and filled it to the brim before anyone could stop him. Sainsbury reached for him, perhaps to protest, but it was too late. He downed it in one long, theatrical gulp. Then he stood up, arms out like a scarecrow, and walked into the darkness. At first, we laughed. It was classic Cheggers, full commitment to nonsense. But when his silhouette disappeared into the woods, and when he didn't laugh or call back, I felt the knot in my chest tighten.
I should go after him, I muttered.
No need, Hanroden said, not looking at me. He's found what he needed.
That sentence hit me like a slap. What he needed? What did that even mean?
I turned to Brody's tent, still zipped, still quiet. Sammy lay sprawled inside his own, mouth half open. No movement. I didn't like it.
And then I was alone.
Hanroden and Sainsbury had closed in. Not physically, not yet, but the world had shrunk. The firelight flickered strangely now. The trees leaned closer. The air thickened. You're special, she said softly. I'm not, I replied, and I hated how small my voice sounded.
You're awake, Hanroden said, even if you don't know it yet.
They offered me another cup, steam rising, the mushrooms now steeped into something darker than tea. It smelled like decay, dressed as fruit. No, thanks, I said, voice stronger now.
You don't have to be afraid, Sainsbury cooed, rubbing my shoulder with a thin hand that felt like it was carved from driftwood.
But I was afraid, deeply, utterly afraid.
They didn't stop. Not at no, not at please.
Hanroden brought the cup to my lips himself. He smiled, the kind of smile that belongs on wax dolls, not people. He tilted the mug toward me, but I clenched my jaw. When the liquid touched my lips, I faked a gulp and smacked my lips like it was delicious. It wasn't, it was death in tea form. I needed a distraction, I needed out, so I vomited. Real this time, I doubled over, heaving into a pile of leaves. The forest blurred, my vision pixelated, but the panic sharpened everything else. The sounds, the fire crackle, their breathing. Puking had caused me to start sobering up. Sainsbury crouched next to me, whispering. Her voice was like dry grass brushing against my ear. She said something about letting go, about opening myself to the world, and she tried to hold my face, and I batted her hand away. That's when Hanroden's hands found my back.
He rubbed, he murmured, but there was nothing kind about it.
He asked me if I wanted to take my clothes off, and I said no, and both their hands were all over me, prodding and poking and groping.
I shoved at them, stood up, staggered back.
Sainsbury laughed, or maybe it was a bird. I couldn't tell. Everything twisted, their faces blurred. Her eyes were massive moons. His beard moved like it was alive. I fell again, scraping my hand. My thoughts screamed for Pal, for anyone, but the forest was silent. And then, as if summoned by the raw panic tearing through my chest, he came.
It didn't sound human at first.
A guttural cry, primal and furious, shattered the forest silence, yet my head snapped toward the trees. A figure burst forth, limbs wild, eyes burning. It was Pal. Then my mind cleared and I saw my mate Pal charging through the trees, swinging a great big stick as he ran. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask questions. He just stormed toward Hanroden and let out another war cry that shook the branches. Sainsbury backed away, hands up, her voice high-pitched and warbling. Hanroden tried to speak, to charm, but Pal wasn't listening. He raised the branch like it was Excalibur and brought it down, not on Hanroden himself, but on the tent behind him. It crumpled under the blow. That was enough. Hanroden scrambled backwards, dragging Sainsbury with him, his face twisted from peace to panic in seconds. He wasn't enlightened. He wasn't wise. He was afraid. Pal dropped to his knees beside me and cracked open a warm can of Coke. He pressed it to my lips. The sugar and the shock helped me sober up a bit more, and I joined Pal in screaming at that old art teacher who was struggling to pull up his pants. Pal slapped my cheeks, gently, just enough to bring me back. The world snapped into color again. I could see clearly, could breathe. I watched, stunned, as Pal advanced. He grabbed Hanroden by the jacket, shoved him, barked at him. "Leave," he said. "Now." Hanroden tried to speak. Pal hit the tree behind him with the stick so hard it cracked. Sainsbury whimpered.
Then they left, stumbling, filthy, dragging their tent like a carcass.
Pal watched them vanish into the dark. Then he sat down beside me, and for a moment we didn't speak. The morning after didn't feel like morning at all. There was sunlight, sure, pale shafts cutting through the trees like guilt through a hangover. There was birdsong, distant and distracted, like even the forest couldn't look us in the eye. But the weight in the air wasn't dew or mist, it was aftermath. I crawled out of my tent slowly, every joint aching, head pulsing like someone had played drums on it all night. I expected silence. I feared chaos. What I saw was something in between. I woke up in the tent as the sun was rising. And crawling out, I came face to face with two very hungover friends, Sammy and Brody. Sammy was holding his forehead like it might split open. Brody looked pale, lips cracked, eyes bloodshot. They hadn't seen what happened. Not really, man. They'd passed out before things turned. Pal was there too, sitting cross-legged by the fire pit, sipping black coffee from a chipped enamel mug like he hadn't just chased two predators into the trees with a makeshift weapon.
His eyes found mine, and in them I saw everything. Rage, regret, relief.
"You okay?" he asked. I nodded. It was a lie. He knew. We didn't speak for a while. The forest didn't encourage words that morning, just the sounds of flame and slow breathing. Then Sammy stirred. He muttered something about mushroom tea, sat up too fast, and threw up behind a tree. Brody joined us at the fire, blinking slowly, mumbling. "I had the weirdest dream." He looked around. "Where's the beard guy?" Pal didn't look at him. "Gone." The word landed like a stone in a pond. Ripples spread. Cheggers wasn't there yet, still unconscious in his tent, no doubt swimming through a technicolor nightmare. We let him sleep. Maybe he needed to be gone a bit longer. That's when Pal spoke again. "I didn't go for a walk," he said. "Not really."
None of us responded. It felt like he needed to say it uninterrupted. I mean, I did at first, but when I saw his face, when I realized who he was, I couldn't breathe. So I left. Needed space, time to think.
He set his coffee down, picked up a stick, and began poking at the ashes in the fire pit. "Do you remember that farm trip in year 7? He asked. Sammy and Brody both frowned. I did too. Vaguely. It had been years ago. A school nature weekend or something. Pal nodded. Special education group. I was in it. No one said anything. We knew Pal had struggled back then, but we'd never talked about it. He didn't like to mention it, and we respected that. There were only a few of us, he continued. 3 boys. Hanroden was one of the teachers. I liked him at first. Everyone did. He was fun. He let us draw stuff no other teacher would. Let us listen to music. Treated us like people. His voice faltered. But then he started lingering in the showers. Every night, he never touched me. Not directly, but he looked, talked, made comments, called me sensitive, and said I was growing up fast. The fire crackled. The trees creaked. Nothing moved. Pal had been a slow developer and had special classes in years 7 and 8 for kids who were behind. Hanroden was one of the other teachers, chaperoning it. He dropped the stick into the embers. I didn't tell anyone, didn't think it was enough. I convinced myself I'd misunderstood, that I was being dramatic. But when he left the school a year later and just vanished, I started to wonder. He looked up at us then, eyes hard.
When I saw him yesterday, I knew it wasn't just in my head. I knew it.
Sammy exhaled slowly when Brody muttered something under his breath. I just stared.
I wanted to say something, to thank him, to apologize, to scream, but all I managed was, "Why didn't you say anything?"
He shrugged. What would you have done? What would any of us have done back then? And he was right. We were kids, powerless, naive, conditioned to believe adults, especially teachers, were untouchable. The system had never been built for us. Not really.
Pal looked at me. "I shouldn't have left you with him. I thought you were all grown. I thought I was being paranoid." You saved me, I said.
He blinked, once, twice, then nodded. Cheggers finally emerged, wild-eyed and mumbling about tiny dragons and mushrooms that whispered in Latin. He looked awful, sweaty, pale, shaking. We fed him toast and water, but no one told him what really happened. Not yet. He wouldn't have handled it well. By mid-morning, we started packing. No one said it, but we all knew the trip was over. We didn't want to be there anymore. Not because of the woods. The woods had never betrayed us, but because innocence doesn't grow back once it's been scorched. As I rolled up my sleeping bag, I found a small badge in the dirt, a button from Han Roden's hat. It read, "Be free, say yes to everything,"
I dropped it into the fire
and watched it melt. We didn't talk much on the way back to the cars. The forest seemed quieter than it should have been, like it was holding its breath. Even the birds were reluctant that morning, as if they, too, had witnessed something they couldn't unsee. Our boots made soft sounds on the moss and packed earth, but none of us filled the silence with jokes or complaints the way we used to. It was over. Not just the trip, but something older, some kind of boyhood magic we hadn't realized we were still clinging to. Cheggers walked in the back, head down, hoodie pulled over his eyes. He hadn't asked questions, but he knew something had happened. He looked at me once, just once, and I saw fear. Not of what he'd seen, but of what he hadn't. Sammy and Brody kept to the middle, trading half-hearted observations about the weather and complaining about their headaches. It was all a front. None of us were okay.
Pal led the way.
He didn't speak at all. The cars were still there. That was almost surprising. For some reason, I had half expected Han Roden to have slashed the tires or left some kind of message, but no. Everything was untouched. Cheggers' car stood like a faithful dog, waiting to take us home. As we loaded our things, I caught sight of something shiny on the driver's side mirror, a sticker, one of those cheap, circular ones that come free with certain tabloid magazines. It hadn't been there before. It read, "Everything you see is a choice." I peeled it off and threw it into the woods. That's when Pal spoke. "Before we go," he said, "I need to tell you what I found last night." We turned. He wasn't looking at us. He was staring into the trees again, like the answer might still be watching.
I followed them. I made sure they packed up, made sure they left. They didn't fight, just watched me. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. And him? He looked like he knew he'd been caught, like this wasn't the first time.
He turned toward us now, voice low. They had more of those pills to more tabs. A cooler box full of things. There were notes, too, pages torn from sketchbooks, maps, names. I only saw them for a second, but some of those names I recognized, old classmates like kids from our year. My blood turned cold.
What do you mean? Sammy asked, his voice thin. I mean, Pal said, I don't think this was just a couple of old hippies reliving their youth. I think this was a system, a routine, and we weren't the firsts.
The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd carried in our rucksacks. We drove in convoy for a while. No music, no conversation, just tires humming on country roads and the occasional cough from the back seat. When we finally stopped for petrol, Sammy went to the loo, Cheggers stretched his legs, and I caught Pal by the vending machines.
You really think he's done this before? I asked. He nodded.
And you think he'll do it again?
He hesitated.
I think he already has. That night, back in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. The walls felt too close, the sheets too warm. My skin itched with memory. I opened my laptop and searched his name. Not Han Roden, the real one, the name I remembered from his classroom door years ago. Still knew how to spell it. I typed it into the engine, added teacher, art. Allegations.
At first, nothing. But then, snippets.
A forum post from years back. Anyone remember Mr. H from Hartsfield High? Bit creepy with the girls, no? A blurry newspaper scan from the early 2000s. Local teacher resigns amid internal inquiry. No charges filed. A Reddit thread that had 3 comments, all deleted, or that was all. But it was enough. The next day, I called Pal. What should we do? I asked. There was a long pause.
I don't know, he said. I really don't. And I understood.
Because some monsters don't live in castles or dungeons. They wear beards and army jackets. They tell stories by the fire and smile too often. And when they vanish, they leave behind smoke and silence and confusion. We never went back to that forest again. Story number 2. I once believed nature held all the answers, until the forest whispered back with a human voice. There was a cave in the Sierra that had never known tourists, never tasted firelight, only shadows. The day I saw leaves smeared in blood red across our tent, I knew we had wandered into someone else's nightmare. Somewhere in those mountains, something watches, not beast, not man, just something. This story isn't a ghost tale, it's a caution, a warning to adventurers who think isolation means safety. There was a place deep in the Sierra Nevada that didn't show up on any of the trail forums or park ranger maps. That's precisely why we chose it. Sean, my oldest friend and a photography purist, had a knack for finding these forgotten coordinates tucked between mountain ridges like buried secrets. I was more of a journal keeper than a thrill seeker. While Sean adjusted exposure levels and fumbled with ND filters, I scribbled philosophical rants into leather-bound notebooks. Pretending I was a modern-day Thoreau, he'd call it romanticism, I called it research. We were both native Californians, and our beloved mountain range was our absolute favorite place to spend time when we needed a break from the rat race. One time we settled on a spot we'd never explored before. It was a fairly remote site off the beaten track, and we couldn't find any evidence that it had ever been camped at. Exactly the kind of spot Sean and I'd like to check out and document. The clearing was quiet. Too quiet. No boot prints, no ashes, no human touch. Just a narrow path carved by animals and time. It felt wrong, even before anything happened, but that's the strange thing about adventure. When something feels off, it's often what pulls you in deeper. We pitched the tent near a crescent of fir trees that almost looked like they were guarding something. I didn't like that thought at the time, so I kept it to myself. The next morning, we followed a narrow stream threading through the woods like a silver snake. The terrain gradually lifted, and after an hour, we stood at the base of a craggy formation that rose like the spine of some slumbering beast. Sean was ecstatic. He paused to photograph what he insisted was a golden eagle flying overhead, and a bit later, we spied a mountain lion prowling across some rocks. Thankfully, in the far distance, we broke for lunch beneath a cliff, where he vanished behind a curtain of boulders. A minute later, I heard his voice, low, sharp, urgent. "Come here," he said. But quietly, he'd found a cave. Not a shallow burrow, but a black hole in the mountain itself. It looked wrong. There's no better word. The opening was jagged and wide enough to swallow a man without a trace. Something about the gaping, dark opening in the rock gave me the creeps, though, and I suggested that maybe we should move on. Sean said that he wanted to get a few photographs of the cavern entrance, and we were both armed and had bear spray and all that good stuff, so it didn't seem too risky. I remember how the darkness ate the beam of my flashlight, like it didn't reflect but absorbed. We stepped in. The temperature dropped, like we'd opened a fridge door from hell. It felt like we'd stepped into liquid shadows. There was a crunch under my foot. I looked down. It was some kind of bone, not a fresh kill. Yellowed, dry. Something had been here a while. Then Sean hissed my name. He was pointing upward. I followed his gaze. Movement, just a flicker, and then shape. A shadow darted across the beam of the flashlight. It was human, or human enough.
It's a person, Sean breathed.
When I called out, I expected silence, maybe the scuffle of paws. Not a reply. "Hello," I said, my voice already fraying at the edges. The echo returned like a threat.
"Hello, get," then a string of curse words.
Sean was tugging my arm so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. "Let's go," he growled. Still, part of me hesitated. I'd heard stories, people driven from towns, hiding in caves, whole generations surviving off the grid. It was insane to romanticize it. I knew that, but some childish part of me wanted to believe we'd discovered a hermit or a survivor, not a danger. Then something else responded, from deeper in the cave, just beyond where the light faded. A single word, and drawn out, I'd spat like venom.
Go!
I felt the cold hit my spine like a blade. Sean didn't wait for me to choose. He yanked me by the pack strap, and we stumbled out. Hearts, jackhammering. The trail back to our tent was quiet, except for the imaginary footsteps behind us. We didn't talk. We couldn't. When we reached the campsite, we stopped. Frozen. My stomach clenched. Our tent was covered in blood. Or what we thought was blood. When your tent is covered in red liquid, what do you assume? Now, up close. It was much clearer that it was some type of paint. Someone had tossed a can of red paint all over the outside of our tent. It soaked through everything: sleeping bags, notebooks, gear. Worse, a single word was painted in big, shaky strokes across the fabric. Leave. We didn't pack, we didn't argue. We just left. It took us hours to reach the car. The shadows seemed closer now, like something had followed. We checked into a roadside motel and found a dim bar next door. Sean downed 2 bourbons before the bartender even said hello. We told him our story, expecting disbelief. Instead, he laughed. "You're lucky," he said. "Most don't walk out of there." He explained that area was home to a loose group of meth cooks and their clients, junkies, squatting in caves, armed and paranoid. Apparently, that area was home to a gang of meth cooks, and their junkie clients would often camp out or hang around the mountainside. He said it was surprising. You only bumped into one of them. There's normally a few trailers dotted around that area, meth heads letting off guns and all sorts of stuff. Suddenly, the voice in the cave made more sense. The paint, the warning, not supernatural, just dangerously human. We never went back. We still camp, but we check maps more closely, and we never, ever ignore the feeling that something is off. Because sometimes, what hides in the woods isn't trying to haunt you.
It's trying to kill you.
Story number 3. They say paranoia feeds on silence, but what happens when silence feeds it back? The first crack in our relationship didn't sound like a scream, it was the absence of one. When your phone, your car, and your trust are shattered in the same breath, what do you cling to? She smiled under moonlight, whispered about forever, and days later destroyed everything. I used to think danger came from strangers. Rhode Island taught me better. I thought I understood love, not the sweeping, cinematic kind where the rain kisses your face just as they do, but the kind you live in every day. Grocery runs, inside jokes, 2 toothbrushes by the sink. Julia had that sort of presence, calm, radiant, effortless. We'd been together for nearly 8 months, a time frame that, looking back, feels far longer than the story I'm about to tell. We weren't living together yet, and that was her choice more than mine. Julia adored her independence. She said it was sacred to her, non-negotiable, she'd once put it. And I didn't want to repeat the mistake from my last relationship where I'd pushed for too much too fast. So instead, we became that couple who took regular weekend getaways. Road trips became our intimacy. We had vacationed in all kinds of places, from charming antique towns to rickety amusement parks with questionable safety standards. But this trip? This one was different. A full 2-week camping and coast escape. Julia picked Rhode Island. Her exact words were, "There's something ancient in the forests there. I want to sit in it." I didn't argue. I rented the Airbnb for the last few days of the trip and found a campground near the coast for the first leg. It was early fall. Leaves turned gold at the edges like fire-licking paper. The drive took nearly 8 hours with stops. As we passed into wooded countryside, Julia stared out the window like she was in a trance. "It's so beautiful it hurts," she said.
I remember that sentence because it felt too much. But in the moment, I was just that happy. Everything seemed perfect.
The campground was nearly empty when we arrived. Our chosen spot lay nestled on the edge of the forest with a small pond glimmering nearby. It was the sort of view you'd see on a puzzle box, untouched, idyllic, almost unnaturally serene. We set up our tent, lit a small fire, cooked some cheap sausages. and drank lukewarm beers. That night, we took a walk under the moonlight, ending up by the pond, watching stars reflect like shattered glass in the still water.
"I want this to be forever," she whispered.
I wrapped my arm around her and thought, maybe I'll ask her to move in when this trip is over. That was the last peaceful moment I remember. The next morning, the world was wrong. I woke up not to the chirping of birds or the rustling of wind through leaves, but to Julia screaming.
"What the hell?" she cried. "What did they do? Why would they do this?"
I pulled on my jeans and stumbled outside. The clearing was a mess. Our entire campsite had been trashed. Cooler overturned, food scattered, burgers half buried in the dirt, mac and cheese slopped on a tree stump like some childish protest. Empty beer cans rolled near the fire pit. The smell of spilled alcohol stung my nose. "They broke into the car," Julia said. "The windshield's gone." She wasn't exaggerating. My BMW's back window had been shattered, the glass littering the ground like salt. My heart sank. Scratches lined one entire side of the car, deep ones like something had clawed at it. I felt sick. "Our phones," she added. "They smashed them too." She pointed to a pile near a tree. Sure enough, both devices were shattered beyond repair. Something about that didn't sit right with me. We'd both had our phones in the tent with us the night before. I'd fallen asleep watching videos. How did they get them? Before I could think further, Julia gasped and pointed toward the forest. My clothes, those bastards threw my underwear into the bushes. A few items were visible hanging from low branches like grotesque decorations, and I felt a strange mixture of rage, confusion, and dread. Then came Julia's theory, frat boys. She swore she'd seen a group of them when we checked in, loud, drunk, the type to vandalize for fun.
"They wanted to scare us and I saw them and I know I did."
When I asked if she saw them last night, she hesitated, said it was dark. Not sure, couldn't say for certain, but she was adamant they were the culprits. I was too overwhelmed to argue. We cleaned up the mess in silence. When I mentioned heading home, Julia looked at me like I'd said something unforgivable. "No, please, let's not end it like this," she begged. "We can patch up the windshield, buy supplies, keep going. We can still have our trip."
I didn't understand. Our phones were dead. The car was wrecked. And she wanted to stay.
Eventually, a ranger showed up, said it was probably just kids. No one saw anything, no real leads, no help. He shrugged like it was normal and told us to be more careful. The absurdity of it all made me feel like I was going insane. Julia, on the other hand, seemed weirdly upbeat, as if all of this was just a hiccup. She grabbed my arm and said, "Let's go to the camp store. I'll cook you dinner. Just don't let this ruin everything." So we went, and that's when everything truly began to unravel. The walk to the campground store should have been short and silent, but Julia kept humming. After everything that had happened, she was bouncing along like a kid on a scavenger hunt. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, her fingers brushing over moss-covered trees. The way she twirled a fallen leaf between her fingers, she looked like she was auditioning for joy. I tried to match the energy, I really did, but something kept ringing in the back of my mind like an unanswered call. The phones. We'd both fallen asleep with them in the tent. No one could have gotten them without waking us up. Not unless... "Hey, wieners or brats?" she asked, holding up 2 shrink-wrapped packages as we stood in the store. I blinked at her, my brain still stuck in mental diagnostics. Took too long to answer.
"I don't know," I muttered. "Whatever." That was enough to set her off.
"Whatever," she snapped. "You always do this? You never make a choice. You just float through everything and expect me to decide."
It was the volume of it. The cashier looked up, startled. I raised my hands.
"Okay, brats. Brats are fine."
"Too late. You didn't mean it."
She slammed the sausages down and stormed out of the store. The cashier looked at me like I was the one who'd peed in the coffee machine. I paid for the supplies quickly, muttering apologies I didn't owe, and stepped back into the sunlight. Julia was gone. I scanned the surrounding trees or gravel paths while bathroom stalls, nothing. Then from across the parking lot, I saw a small group of guys lounging near a campsite. Young, early 20s, tattoos, and a guitar one of them wasn't playing. Could these be the frat bros? I approached them, hesitantly. One of them noticed me and gave a lazy, polite nod. I waved.
Hey, sorry to bother. You guys been around here long?
They nodded. One replied. Few days, place is dead. Just us and old people. Seems like...
I swallowed.
You didn't happen to see anyone sketchy last night? Someone maybe vandalizing other camps? All three of them frowned.
Vandalizing? One repeated. No, man. Why?
I explained briefly the damage. Car, phones, food. One of them even whistled. That's messed up, but no, haven't seen anyone like that. Then one of them leaned closer, voice lower. Hey, you okay, man? I furrowed my brow.
Yeah, why?
He scratched his chin. That girl you're with, she seemed, I don't know, volatile, angry. I was too stunned to reply. I nodded stiffly and walked away. When I got back to the campsite, it was quiet again, except for the sound, sobbing. I dropped the groceries and ran to the tent. Julia was curled up, rocking back and forth, her face buried in her knees, and
I knelt beside her. What happened?
it took her a full minute to speak.
3 guys came back, she whispered. They followed me, said things, gross things. One kicked the car. I didn't know what to do.
I froze. The rage that flared inside me was primal, but so was the confusion. Where were they now? Why would they attack her in broad daylight near a campground store? I forced myself to breathe. Okay. Did you see what they looked like? She recoiled. Why does that matter? Why are you interrogating me? You think I'm lying? I blinked.
No, if we're going to tell the cops, we need to...
I don't want the cops involved, she screamed. I don't want to talk about it again. The sobs came harder. I felt helpless, torn between instinct and reason. We sat in that tent for what felt like hours, so eventually, she calmed down enough to lie in my lap, and I just kept stroking her hair, trying to imagine this was normal.
That night, I insisted we leave. Julia protested with the force of a hurricane.
If we leave, they win. If we give up our trip, those bastards get what they want. We came here to reconnect, and now you're abandoning me. I didn't know what to say anymore. Every option felt like stepping into a trap. As the fire crackled, I sat across from her in silence. The marshmallows stayed in the bag. The sausages stayed raw. We didn't eat.
And then it came...
The question I didn't realize had been haunting me until it slipped from my mouth. How did they get the phones? She blinked. What? Our phones, I said. We were using them in the tent, watching videos. Neither of us charged them in the car. So how did the vandals get to them? She stared at me, mouth open, then closed, then open again. The silence between us felt like someone pressing their thumb into my chest.
Then? Are you saying I did it? Is that what this is? You think I did this to us?
No, I said quickly. I'm just trying to understand. Well, try harder, she snapped. That was when the red flags turned into road flares. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat of my vandalized car, the tarp rustling slightly where we'd taped it over the broken window. The woods beyond the tree line felt like they were holding their breath. And then Julia climbed into the passenger seat beside me.
I lied, she said, so quietly I barely heard her. I didn't say anything. I did it, she whispered. The car, the phones, the food, all of it.
My stomach dropped. Why? She was crying again. It could not hysterically this time, but a broken, exhausted sort of weeping.
I thought you were going to leave me. You were pulling away. You loved that stupid car more than me. I thought if we were in danger, you'd feel close to me again like a protector.
I couldn't speak. My throat had locked shut. I didn't plan it like a psycho, she added. It spiraled. I smashed the phones so we'd have to be present. I scratched the car because it felt good, and then I made up the frat boys because I didn't know how else to explain it.
I turned and stared at her.
You ruined everything, I said. For what? For some fantasy? She winced. I didn't mean to hurt you, but she had hurt me in the exact way she knew would cut deepest. Not with knives, but with lies. And yet, Some part of me still wanted to save her, still wanted to believe this wasn't beyond repair.
That part of me was stupid.
We packed in silence. The road home felt like purgatory, long, grey, dead of sound. She reached for my hand once. I pulled it away. When we arrived at her apartment, she tried to kiss me. I turned my cheek. "We'll talk tomorrow," I said. But there was no tomorrow. I woke up to find myself blocked on everything. Phone, Facebook, email. A few hours later, I got a message from a mutual friend about, "Why would you cheat on her? She's crushed. Can't believe you treated her like that." It didn't stop. Weeks went by, then months. She told people her version of the story, one where I was cold, abusive, emotionally unavailable, one where she was the victim. And no matter what I said, I couldn't untangle the web. I was a villain in the story she told. And the worst part, some people believed it. I cut ties with everyone, moved out of state, got a job in a new city, started over. Years passed. I met someone else, a woman with kind eyes and a strong heart. We got married. She's pregnant now. I try not to look over my shoulder anymore, but I still get random messages from burner accounts sometimes, calling me a coward, a rat, a liar. And once, in a city Julia had never been to, my car was keyed again. Same pattern, same angle, same aggression. Maybe it was just coincidence, or maybe some ghosts don't die, they just wait. With a pulse, months after everything ended, I received a manila envelope. No return address, no handwriting, just my name printed on the front in faint, typed font. For a moment I thought it might be a legal notice. Maybe Julia was suing me for something absurd. But inside were photocopied pages from a journal. Pages dated 2 months before our camping trip. The handwriting looked eerily familiar.
He doesn't see me anymore. He looks at the car more than my face. I'll make him see me, even if it's the last thing I do.
Chills climbed my spine. The entries weren't violent. They were sad, frantic, obsessive. What if danger brings closeness? What if fear is the only thing he'll respond to? I stared at the page where she had sketched a tent on fire and scribbled underneath, "Reset the story." That phrase haunted me more than anything else, or reset the story. Like she wanted to reboot our relationship using trauma as a jump start. I burned the copies that night, but I still see those sketches in my dreams sometimes. I'd moved states, switched jobs, got married. And yet, one rainy afternoon, 2 years later, I walked into a quiet cafe and saw her.
Julia.
She was sitting by the window, alone, drinking tea. No phone, no laptop, just staring.
I froze.
She looked thinner. Her hair was shorter. Her eyes, still the same, dark, endless, unreadable. She looked up and met my gaze, and she smiled. Not a smirk, not sarcasm, a soft, genuine smile like we were old friends bumping into each other after years apart.
Then, slowly, she raised her hand and waved once.
I turned and walked out, didn't order, didn't stop, just kept walking. For days after, I checked my car 3 times before bed. My wife noticed. I told her it was just an old ghost from a different life. She held my hand, but I could tell she felt it too. The air had changed. Sometimes I dream about the tent. Except this time, I'm the one trashing it. I'm holding the bat. I'm smashing the phones. I'm pouring beer on the firewood.
And Julia's standing there, silent, watching me.
"This is how you showed me you cared," she says. I wake up drenched in sweat, gasping. My wife holds me close, telling me it's okay. But I don't tell her what I saw in the dream.
I don't tell her that for one split second. I understood Julia.
And that scared me more than any threat she ever made. 6 months ago, we had our first child, a beautiful baby girl. And as I held her for the first time, something inside me whispered, would Julia ever hurt a child? It was a terrible thought, one I never wanted to have. But it came, uninvited, like an echo through a broken window.
I don't believe she would. And yet, when I got home from the hospital, I found a white envelope tucked under my front doormat.
Inside was a single photo. Me, my wife, our newborn, at the hospital. Taken from behind the glass. No note.
I don't have proof Julia left the envelope, and I never saw her, never caught her.
But sometimes when I'm driving and a car follows me for too long, when my wife mentions camping again, well, when I see pine trees in the fall,
I feel it,
like the loop is beginning again, like something fractured never got sealed.
and maybe it never will.
Story number 4. You'd be surprised how close two people can get when they're half naked, lost in the woods, and being chased by a shotgun-wielding stranger.
I never believed in noble lies until one almost saved both our lives.
She wore a Spider-Man shirt. I wore regret. Neither of us wore pants. If you've ever tried to impress someone by pretending to care about environmental issues, this story is for you. It started with a protest and ended with a cup of tea inside the home of the man who nearly shot us. I wasn't an activist, but I wasn't even particularly opinionated. But I was 20, bored, and hopelessly enchanted by Amy, the kind of girl who could make anything sound like a revolution. When Amy, the girl that I was into, took me to buy camping gear, I thought we were just going to make some noise and wave some placards, not spend the night there. So there I was, lugging a tent I barely knew how to pitch, nodding as Amy passionately explained fracking and ecological collapse, all while I was internally Googling how to impress girls at protests. The next morning, about 100 of us pitched our tents by the side of the road, ready to block any traffic into the drilling site. A guy in dreadlocks had rigged up a speaker system, blasting classic rock to set the rebellious mood. Amy joined in on the chants, and I echoed them, always half a beat behind. Every time a car passed through the road, we ran out to block it and chanted our slogans.
Honestly, I just hoped she'd notice how committed I looked.
Later in the day, when everyone had eaten all the snacks they brought, one legend had brought a whole barbecue and enough burgers and sausages to share. We were camped near the back edge, our tent slightly isolated. I joked that we could save money by sharing one, but Amy wasn't amused. Still, I helped her set it up and showed her how to use guy ropes, earning a reluctant smile. As dusk fell, the forest edge nearby darkened like a curtain being drawn. Amy handed me a cold beer from her cooler. I'd hoped I'd done enough to make her think I was boyfriend material.
Then everything changed with a flashlight beam and the shape of a man we didn't recognize.
We were woken up a few hours later by the owner of the tiniest edge of land we'd inadvertently been camping on. In the pale moonlight, his figure loomed larger than life, and so did the rusted shotgun cradled in his arms. I was disoriented, dressed only in boxers, while Amy emerged in a Spider-Man t-shirt, barefoot and frozen. The farmer began screaming and hollering, and I have honestly never been more afraid. Without thinking, we sprinted, not toward the other tents and safety, but in the opposite direction. Adrenaline and bad decisions steered our legs. The woods swallowed us whole. I grabbed her hand and ran into the woods, hoping she'd run with me, which she did, but soon the trees grew denser, and we lost each other. My legs tore through thorns and roots. Once I tripped on a root, feeling my knees smash into the earth. Somewhere in the dark, I heard her voice call out in panic. I managed to catch up with Amy, but so had the farmer. His shadow loomed behind her, but he hadn't noticed me. I had a choice: run and save myself, or step out into the open.
I chose her. I pleaded with him that we hadn't meant to use his land, that we wouldn't do it again, that we were lost.
Amy clutched my arm. I told him it was my idea to join the protest, to camp, to cross the invisible line onto his property. She looked at me, eyes wide, not just in fear, but disbelief. He stared at us, silent, before suddenly laughing, and I later found out from his wife that the shotgun wasn't even loaded and was too rusty to fire. Relieved, but exhausted, we followed him back down the hill. As the sun crept up behind the horizon, we could more or less just walk towards the noise of the protest camp, still echoing in the distance. We gave him a flyer. Amy spoke softly about what the protest meant. He didn't argue, just nodded and invited us inside. For tea, he offered us into the farmhouse for a cup of tea. I never did get a date with Amy, but we became very close friends. She teased me later about the noble line. I told her it was for effect. She laughed.
I never went back to the protest. Life moved on. But sometimes, when I think about that night, I wonder what truly scared me more, the old man's gun, or the fear of not being seen as brave enough.
Amy still wears that Spider-Man shirt sometimes. I still don't know which universe it's from, and I still feel like a hero every time she smiles at me, like I might have actually saved her. Months passed, and so did the cause we'd stood for, or sat for, or ran through the woods in our underwear for. I never went back to the protest. I read online that the drilling eventually got pushed through anyway, with some minor environmental concessions, or whatever that means. A photo of Amy made it onto a local paper's front page. She was holding a soggy cardboard sign and yelling at a Land Rover. I cut it out and pinned it to my bedroom wall like some people do with movie posters. Amy and I stayed close. Close in the way that aches a little if you're not careful. We met for coffee, talked politics, argued about the ethics of oat milk, and never, not once, mentioned the night in the woods unless it was for a cheap laugh. But I think about it more than I let on. One day she invited me to a campus screening of the Blair Witch Project. Closure, she said. I agreed, even though that film still made my chest tighten. Midway through, during a particularly disorienting camera shake, she leaned in and whispered, "This is where you fell over and swore you broke your leg."
I didn't swear, I whispered back.
You cried a little.
I smiled. Maybe I had. Or maybe she was rewriting that night in her own way. We both needed it to mean something, even if it was just a shared absurdity.
Here's the thing nobody tells you about bravery. It rarely looks the way you expect.
That night, I wasn't brave because I stood up to a man with a gun. I was brave because I stayed, because I didn't lie down in the cold mud and give up when my legs ached and fear was chewing at my ribs. I kept going, towards her voice, towards the risk, towards a connection that, even if it didn't turn into romance, still shaped who I became.
I learned that not all connections are built to last in the way you hope, but they last in other ways. Amy went on to organize things, to speak at conferences, to get detained twice in Belgium. She still messages me every now and then, but mostly memes, sometimes links to articles titled things like "The Most Effective Ways to Stop Pipeline Construction." I work in publishing now. I help authors find their voice. Ironic, I know, considering I once lost mine screaming, "No fracking," in front of a Tesco lorry, just to impress someone who didn't know my last name yet. Sometimes I look out at forests and remember how scared I was, not of death, but of disappointing someone. And sometimes, just sometimes, I wear that Spider-Man t-shirt she left in my bag after laundry day. It's mine now, I think, a soft, cotton souvenir from a version of me I barely recognize, but never want to forget. And if I'm being honest, I still don't care that much about fracking, but I care about stories, the ones we live through, the ones we tell ourselves to make sense of them. And this one began with a protest, but it became a memory I protest ever forgetting. Story number 5.
They told me not to come here alone. I smiled, nodded, and ignored them all.
The moment I left the marked trail, it felt like the forest itself held its breath. The trees weren't just trees, they were witnesses. When the chanting started, I thought it was my imagination. By the third round, I knew someone, or something, was standing outside my tent.
If you leave, you'll die. The voice wasn't angry, it was calm, like a fact, like gravity.
And then the fire lit itself. I never believed in warnings, especially the kind that came from well-meaning friends who had never stepped off a sidewalk, let alone into the wilderness. My name's Anton, and I'm from Germany, and please pardon if my English is not perfect. I learned to speak it from watching American TV and visiting America, and I taught myself. They all said it was too dangerous, that hiking alone in Appalachia was tempting fate, but solitude is my sanctuary. I've crossed glacial ravines in Iceland and wandered alone through the forests of Romania. Thought Appalachia would be quaint. I'm an adventurer and hiker, and I spent much of my time camping and hiking all around Europe. Anywhere worth visiting, I visited it. Europe had taught me discipline, but America? America felt like untamed myth. When I first arrived in the States, I stayed with online friends, used a rental car to get close to the trailhead, and packed everything I'd need: maps, dried food, emergency flares. My friends had begged me to stick to the marked trails. I nodded in agreement, but I already knew I wouldn't. The plan was never to follow the rules. The Appalachian air was thicker than I expected, scented with pine sap and moss. My boots crunched softly on the path. That first night, I obeyed the trail. I did what they said, but the second night, I followed a side path that wound into a shadowed grove of red maples. That's where I found it. The trees were so huge and towering, unlike anything we have in Europe, and I was taken by the beauty surrounding me. There was a small pond there, untouched, glassy, not even disturbed by insects. It looked like no one had stepped near it in years. I set my tent by the shore, made a small fire, and soaked in the stillness. That night, I set up my tent beside a small pond. The beauty of the American countryside took my breath away. Stars blinked above me like blinking eyes. I watched them, drifted into a warm calm, and eventually crawled inside to sleep.
I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up with my heart pounding before I even understood why. Then I heard it and howling. Not from animals. It was layered, echoed, like more than one voice, blending with the wind. I awoke later to sounds, howling and calling. At first, I thought it might be a pack of wolves, instinctively, but I grabbed my hunting knife. Germany has strict firearm laws, and as a visitor, I didn't carry a gun, just steel and fear. The howling morphed gradually into something worse. Words. If you leave, you'll die. If you leave, you'll die. The same sentence over and over. Male voices. Flat. Chanting. I called out, trying to inject strength into my voice.
Leave where? I asked. Leave the tent, they said. If you leave the tent, you will die. And then, circling, footsteps in the grass, slow, deliberate. I gripped the blade harder and tried to stop my hands from shaking. They weren't just trying to scare me. They weren't chaotic. They were following some structure, system. One voice said, calm as winter, do not come out. Then came running, but it wasn't toward me. It was chaotic, distant. There were shouts, possibly a fight. Then a voice, closer again, repeated the command, stay in the tent. I held back a scream as I heard one gunshot, and then another. My fire suddenly reignited. Not by me, from inside the tent. I saw the glow through the canvas. Was it a signal?
A warning?
Whoever was out there, they were having some kind of fun. More gunshots, then laughter. Not joy, madness. I stayed frozen. The air was thick, buzzing with tension. I felt like if I moved an inch, something ancient and hidden would notice. Eventually, silence took over. No voices, no footsteps. The fire went out again. I waited, unmoving, for hours. I don't remember when I passed out. I think my body just gave up at dawn. When I awoke, I could see the sun had risen. For a moment, I forgot everything. Then it came rushing back. I unzipped the tent cautiously. I could see no signs of anything that occurred in the night, except for the fact that some of the undergrowth had been trampled down. But that wasn't the worst part. By the dead fire pit was something I hadn't seen before. Sitting by the fire, though, was a six-pack of beer. I had not been there when I went to bed. Perfectly aligned, unopened, like a peace offering. Or a mark. I didn't touch the beer. I packed in a hurry, heart racing. 2 days later, I emerged from that forest. I've since hiked the Appalachian Trail again, but not alone and within the safety of the trail markers. No one could explain it, and some said prank. Others hinted at cult activity. A few just nodded and said, "You're lucky." But luck didn't feel like the right word. Appalachia doesn't just test your survival skills, it tests your sanity. That grove, I couldn't find it again. Not on any map, not with GPS. They say strange things happen on the Appalachian Trail. Germany is the same, but not quite as much. Appalachia is beautiful and haunted and dangerous. And if I go back again, I'll stay on the path.
Probably